am so excited to introduce you to Iris Waichler. Today, we're going to be talking about the joys and challenges of caregiving and how to best take care of yourself as a caregiver. Iris is the leading advocate for health awareness and caregiver support. She's a speaker, an author, a consultant, and a counselor. Welcome, Iris.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thank you, Lindsay.
So excited to have you. Can you give us a little background? I know social work. Let our audience know where you're coming from.
Sure. I've been a social worker for 40 years, medical. A lot of my time was spent working in a hospital with patients with catastrophic illnesses. I worked on a rehab unit, so they had strokes, amputations, burns, head injuries, really serious problems. I also covered the ER, and I also was the director of social work. So I've had a lot of experience working with people where in a second their lives were changed because of a medical problem. And one of the most valuable lessons I learned there was that when people are very seriously ill and they're at their most vulnerable moments, that's when they need a voice, that's when they need an advocate. And when you're in crisis, sometimes you can't do that. Family members are as much shock as the patient. And so that was really the beginning of my work. I realized that people needed a voice. They needed to know what to ask. They needed to have someone kind of guide them through the healthcare maze and to help know what questions to ask to understand what their problems were and what challenges ahead, what to expect, and where to get help. So that's been my governing star for many years. I decided to write a book a long time ago. I've written 3 books. The first was when I was working in the hospital. It was called Patient Power, How to Have a Say During Your Hospital Stay. All my themes have an advocacy component to them, and they're all based on personal experience. So my second book was about infertility. It's called Riding the Infertility Roller Coaster, A Guide to Educate and Inspire. And then my last book is called Role Reversal, How to Take Care of Yourself and Your Aging Parents. And that was really a combination memoir about my dad, my beloved father, and then also I used it. It's in his voice and it's in my voice, which is unusual. Nobody else does that. You hear from a caregiver, but you never hear from the person being taken care of.
Right.
And so it's his story. And then I put all kinds of information and resources and tips about universal themes and challenges for caregivers so they can get a little bit of everything out of it. And the feedback I've gotten is a lot of what my dad went through rings very true for other caregivers. And so I find that people find it very helpful.
Yes. Where can people find your books? Are they on Amazon?
They're on
Or
Amazon. Also, a local bookstore can order it if they don't have it.
okay. So let's go into this. Can we kind of hang tight on the caregiving part? Before we hit that record button, we were just talking about how the direction, not perfection, listeners, this audience, I would venture to say there's not one of you that has either not been in the caretaking shoes or has a friend or family member in the caretaking shoes. We all need this information from your side, Iris, and any of those tips that you want to provide us. I kind of wanted to start more with the caretaking and then also the piece of keeping ourselves healthy to continue
Yeah,
to be that best
yeah.
caretaker.
Huge issues. And as we spoke before the button went off, COVID has made it so much harder. So the
Mhm.
numbers of caregivers were about 43 million, and with COVID, it rose to 53 million. And that was because the support wasn't there, the finances weren't there. And so people found themselves taking care of their parents and taking care of their children while they were at home. And that's the sandwich generation. And those people are
Yes.
really very challenged in all directions. In terms of caregiving, I think one of the biggest mistakes that people make is they don't have that conversation early enough. They wait until they're in the middle of a crisis. And so one of the recommendations I always give to people is to have the caregiver conversation with your parents while they are healthy, where you can have a conversation where you know the information you're getting is reliable. Because when we have to react from a crisis, it's never good, and it's been panic mode. People are afraid to have that conversation because it's so scary. It reminds us of our mortality. It
Yeah.
reminds our parents that there'll be coming a time where maybe the decisions they want to make about their lives might be in someone else's hands. And I think the other thing that happens when you wait too long is it becomes a confrontation rather than a collaboration. Because when your
Sure.
parents are in a vulnerable or situation or a healthcare crisis, and sometimes they can't make decisions, and then all of a sudden you have to make decisions and it may not be what they want. So I would tell your listeners, if you start early and you have that collaboration mode and you come from a place of love where you say, I really care about you, I love you, I really want to sit down with you and understand what your thoughts are as you get older, what you want to happen. And even if the conversation is shut down immediately and they say, I'm never going to get old, that door's been open a little bit. And
Mhm.
down the road, maybe they'll be more willing to have that conversation. And some of the questions to pose are, as you get older, do you want to stay in the house? As you get older, if you find you have a medical problem and you need help, do you want a family member to do it? Would you like a healthcare professional involved? If the kind of help that you need isn't something we can manage at home, would you consider going somewhere where there's more attention and medical care available? Just those kinds of questions. And also, who is going to be the one to make those decisions for you? They have a lot of people wait, and then the legal documentation isn't there. So things like healthcare proxy. So if someone's on a ventilator, for example, or is not able to communicate their needs, they need to designate somebody who will make those decisions. And so that's another important conversation. The other reason people don't want to have the conversation is because it involves finances too. You need to know what kind of insurance is available and what kind of resources are available so that as a person helping, you can make a plan that's going to meet the financial needs as well as the healthcare needs. So I'd say those are really some of the most important issues. If you get a lot of pushback, that's fine. You can just say, I know right now it's really tough to think about that. Let's both take a breath and we'll come back to it later when you're ready.
It is a great place to start, and you already answered exactly where my brain was going with it. I think a lot of times we need those prompting questions because sometimes we don't know where to start or how to not offend, and that was all beautifully said. Is that something in the role reversal, the caretaking book? Do you have that type of content in there?
I have a script. And
I
I
know I
talk,
can picture people like,
well, and I talk about how I did it with my father, because that's what happened with my dad. My dad lived to be 97, thank God. He died 7 years ago. My mom was much younger. She died when she was 56. And
Mm,
so we never had that conversation with her because she was so young. And
right.
and so everything was on my shoulders. My dad turned to me and said, "You're a medical social worker, you figure it out." And I didn't know what my mother wanted. And I think for some caregivers, that's the most painful part when you're in a position where you have to make literally sometimes life and death decisions and you don't know what your loved one wants. And
Mhm.
so my dad learned from that, and so did I. And so he was very open to having that conversation. All I had to say to him was, I don't want what happened with mom to happen with you and I. So let's
Mhm.
talk about everything that you want to happen. And that's what we did, and step by step. And there wasn't any problem at all because he knew that his best interests were on my mind. And also I knew what he wanted. And that door had been opened so he could go back to it as often as he needed to.
Right, right. And the lucky part is that he was in right frame of mind, and that when you can have that open conversation, it's hard, but it can you go down the other path too of if somebody's already drifting with like Alzheimer's disease, or how did those conversations, or how does somebody even get, this is just selfish conversations, even like how do you know how to approach your significant other about?
Well, the other piece of it is you want to have the right person approaching them. We all have different relationships with different people. And maybe someone's son has not so good a relationship. And when the son approaches them, it might be a problem where their daughter. So that's one thing. Think about the right person. And sometimes the right person isn't a family member. Maybe
Mm,
sometimes it might be a doctor, a trusted doctor who's been treating them for many years, or a neighbor, or a priest, or a rabbi, or whoever. So identifying the right person is so, so important. And if you can't identify a person, if that person isn't there, another option, people don't know about this, but there are people called geriatric care managers. And their job is much like mine was. They're trained to come in and be a mediator, be an advocate, and they're in specific areas. If you go online to aginglife.org, you put in a zip code, and it'll tell you bonded licensed geriatric care managers in your area, and they can come in and help have that conversation. And beyond that, they can say, okay, you need an assisted living place. Here are the best places in your area. Here are the questions you need to ask. I'll go with you if you need me, so you feel that you have somebody there. And they're there for both the patient and the family. So there are a lot of options. And also, if you're in the hospital, that's what I did. I was a social worker in the rehab unit. So I worked with the families, and I came in and we had those conversations all the time. And sometimes I had to be the jump starter,
Right.
and just being there for support. But that's another really great option if a loved one is in the hospital.
I worked in hospitals and I've never heard of a geriatric care manager.
Yeah,
Is it
well,
a volunteer position?
oh, no, no, no. These are
No.
these are people that are trained, and a lot of them are social workers like me. Some of them are nurses, but they're experts in geriatric care. It's been around for quite a while. It's just one of those things. People don't, if you don't know what to ask, then you don't know where to go. And so
Yeah.
I often mention that as an option. And the insurance doesn't cover it, but the cost really is dependent on how intricate you want the relationship to be with the geriatric care manager. If they're more involved, it would cost a little more. But if you feel, especially now, and we're living in a world where we're so far apart from our loved ones, if I have a relative in Texas, I wouldn't know where to be. I'm in Illinois, I wouldn't know where to begin. But you can find a geriatric care manager in Texas, and then that can be a huge relief for family members if there's distance.
Absolutely. Thank you. I
Sure.
always feel like this is what podcasting is about for me, is dumping resources in people's laps, because you and I happen to be privy to some of this information, and then to be able to shout it out to the world that this exists.
That's what social workers are all about, finding resources. So,
Yes,
yeah, but it's
yes.
great. It's great. Your program helps so many people in that way, giving out
Mm,
information they didn't know.
well, thank you. And again, well, I'm excited to keep going because I feel like we're going to keep having these aha moments that are so helpful. Can you go into Alzheimer's patients for us? As far as, is that a whole different level of when you think of caretaking or conversations or?
It is, and that's why I mentioned you want to start early before there are cognitive or memory issues. What you can do in those situations is get legal help and work with an attorney who has an expertise at elder law, or has expertise working with people with medical issues, and they're all over the place right now. One of the wonderful things that's happening now is some lawyers even have social workers or nurses in their practice, and when families come in, the social worker and the nurse is sitting right there raising these questions and these issues. And it would involve some legal work in terms of deciding if someone is competent or not, and it probably would involve a psychological evaluation so that there's a diagnosis. And then what would happen is legally someone would step in and make those decisions if the person needing the help isn't able to do it on their own.
Hmm. Interesting. Yes. I was looking at questions that you were mentioning, because I think of this with Alzheimer's too, is how do caregivers know when they are burned out? So the spouse who is taking care of the memory patient and going, where is that line where I say I can't, how do they start to ask themselves appropriate questions to know if
Yeah,
burnout's happening?
that's in the top 5 of the most challenging aspects of being a caregiver. And close to 70% of caregivers are women, and we're so bad at taking care of ourselves. We're into taking care of everybody else. And so it's really, really important as a caregiver to pay attention to your mind and your body. And what I mean by that is caregivers will, when they're stressed or burned out, will show physical symptoms. Those symptoms are digestive issues, headaches, muscle tension, loss of appetite or eating too much, and physically either having too much sleep or not enough sleep. And those are signs of depression as well. Also, other symptoms that you're burned out include behavioral things and emotional things like if you find yourself getting really angry, if you find yourself being super impatient, if you find yourself being frustrated or overwhelmed a lot. Those are all symptoms and signs of burnout. And the trick is to not get to that point. And oftentimes caregivers aren't thinking about taking care of themselves because they don't think it's fair to the person they're taking care of. But the truth is, you can't be a good caregiver if you're burnt out, and you're doing yourself and the person you're taking care of a favor. People have a hard time, again, women, I think, say no when they're asked to take on something that they can't do. And it's okay to say no, and more than that, it's okay to say no without guilt. And that's the real trick. You have to sort of reframe it and look at it. How can I be the most helpful to a person that I can take care of and I need to take care of? And asking for help is not only a good thing, but it can be the best thing in some circumstances. It's not a sign of failure. It's not a form of failure. It's a way of showing love and self-respect too. And so
Right.
every caregiver plan it's called respite care, and respite just means being able to take a break and take care of yourself. And every caregiver should have a respite plan in place.
And where do people find respite care?
Respite care can be in a number of places. That can mean having another family step up and step in. That's what happened for me. I was taking care of my dad, and my brother flew in from San Francisco, and he stayed for a bit. Um, and that's the thing, you identify members of the family and what their skill sets are. And because families are all over the place, in my case, my sister was in London, and so she couldn't physically be present. But in fact, she did come in to help with my dad, but she also financially wanted to contribute. So she helped pay for us to get some aides to come in for my dad. My dad was living in assisted living, and he wasn't strong about having an aide come in, but what we did was we arranged for aides to come in, and we told him that they came in because they just enjoyed spending time with him. And I would come visit him, and he'd say, "Oh yeah, I'm really popular. They stopped by today." So we had people looking in on him. They were there, he'd go in and take a shower. They'd make sure he was safe. And he
Yeah.
thought he was the most popular guy in the place. And
Oh,
so
that's awesome.
if you can be creative like that. Also, respite care, some skilled nursing programs have a respite care unit, and then also you can always go to home health services and find help from home health aides or whoever, whatever level of care you need from home health care programs too. And for people that are very sick, hospice also provides respite care as well.
So the home health, back to that for a second, that would just be somebody could even go in and Google home health care needs in their area and be able to get a number.
Yes, yes. And if the person that needs care is a senior, for example, you can go to your local senior center. They'll have information. Your local area on aging office will have information. Or you can Google respite care services or home care services. I also encourage people to network. It's amazing how many people know people that have used it. So reach out and look at your resources and see someone you know may have used someone that's really good. It is important when you're bringing someone into your home, you want to interview them and make sure that you have the right person, and that chemistry between the person being taken care of and the caregiver, the home health caregiver is so important too. So you want to make sure when you're interviewing someone that they've taken care of other people that have similar health care issues. You want to make sure they're licensed and bonded. You want to make sure there's no communication issues so that they speak the same language. You want to do a check with the agency too and find out what kinds of things are in place in terms of the agency. And in today's world, you want to make sure that they're vaccinated, that they're healthy as well.
True. True. My goodness, that puts a whole nother layer in there, doesn't
Yeah,
it?
yeah, yeah.
Now, I have an example for you, and this is where your wording is always so helpful. For instance, my mom with her husband, she's at a point where she can't leave him very much. He's at a certain stage of Alzheimer's, but she feels like when she leaves him, it's like dropping a child off at daycare. Like he has that look in his eyes, like, "Where are you going? What are you
Yeah,
doing?" And
yeah,
so I'm just picturing again, like getting creative with somebody new walking into the house. Same thing.
yeah.
Do you have
Yeah, so for that, and again, with a memory issue like that, you can introduce them to someone today, and when they come in tomorrow, they'll totally forget who they are. So for a situation like that, I would put up visual cues, like I would put up a picture of the person and their name. That helps. And then I would also, what I would do is when they come in, I have them engage in activities with the person they're taking care of that would be interesting for them or engaging. For example, we just recently buried the matriarch of our family, and she had serious memory issues, and her grandson was taking care of her. And at the service, he was talking what a privilege it was to be with her. And every day for at least an hour, he pulled out old photographs, and they talked about the people in the photographs, and it was our family. And
Mhm.
every day it was new for her, but she loved it. And he said he'll always cherish those memories. And so reminiscence therapy is really good. And so you could have someone come in who, you know, is not a family member and do that kind of thing. Or if the person's able to go outside, go outside for a walk with them, or go in the garden, or watch a movie that you know they love. Music is a wonderful thing to use with people who have Alzheimer's, because favorite songs and music is deeply embedded in our brains. You know, when you're on the car and a song comes on the radio that you heard 40 years ago and you can remember every single word. It's like that for people with Alzheimer's. It's deep memory, and sometimes that's a great way to calm people down and to do something fun. So putting fun activities together is a really great thing to do when you're bringing in someone new. Talk to them about what you think would work.
Yeah, I love that. Not to move on and come back if we're moving on too fast, but you had also mentioned what are the best ways that caregivers can take care of themselves when you really start to see somebody that you're going, okay, we need to have this conversation.
Yeah, yeah.
Where do you go with that?
The trickiest part of being a caregiver is creating balance in your life between your role as a caregiver, your role as a friend, as a spouse, as whatever profession you're in, or as a student. And so you want to incorporate that. And so you want to make time every week to do something that you find nurturing for your spirit and your soul. It might be doing yoga. It might be having a glass of wine with a dear friend. It might be going out for dinner. It might be sitting in a hot bubble bath with a good book. Things that you know, but physical exercise is super important. Also, eating right is very important. Also, sleep is hugely important. I can remember when my dad was in the final stages, and I'd be waiting for the phone to ring, and inevitably it was between midnight and 4 in the morning, so I couldn't go to sleep. I'd be looking at the ceiling waiting for the phone to ring, and there were so many crisis calls that when I walked into the hospital ER, I felt like Norm walking into Cheers. Everyone knew my name, and I knew all their names. So sleep is super, super important. And also, again, taking care of your mental health. If you do find that there are changes with your temperament, your temper, you're getting frustrated, then again, that's important. And also having someone you can identify to be there for you, just to talk to you about it. It may be a friend, it might be a therapist or counselor, it might be your, your spiritual guide, whoever. Make sure that you have someone that you can sit with and talk about the good things and the challenges. And celebrating the good things is really important too. I think people get really scared about the notion of being a caregiver because they perceive a lot of the tough part of it, but the intimacy that comes with caregiving, the moments I described a minute ago of the grandson and the matriarch in our family, you can have the most beautiful moments as well, and you want to cherish those as well, and that helps nourish your spirit and soul too.
I remember you mentioning with the singing and how the songs come back. My mom's mom had Alzheimer's and couldn't remember her daughter's name, but my mom played the piano and she could harmonize to every song my mom
Yeah,
was singing. So like just cool intimate moments like that where you're like,
it's
oh, that
so great. And if you can create those moments and find humor too, humor is a wonderful thing too.
yes.
And find. And the other thing that people, and this happens with Alzheimer's patients, as I think about it, lots of times when you have Alzheimer's, your behavior changes and you get more combative and more angry and more agitated. And people get in these terrible battles, and it just drains you, and it's so frustrating. And my advice would be, if you're in a situation like that, just back off, take a time out. It doesn't matter if they wear a blue or a red shirt, but just just take a breath, take time, go away, and come back to whatever you need to address at another moment, because a lot of time those are battles you can never win. And the truth of the matter is, if it's someone with memory issues, they're not going to remember, but as the caregiver, you're going to remember it too. So the shorter you can make those episodes, the better it is in terms of taking care of yourself.
Sure. Yes. And back to the health standpoint of the caregiver staying healthy, the thing that I keep hearing out of a lot of clients and family members is this scary part about letting, if you go down, the ship goes down type of thing. What do you have to say about that when people have that intense fear that I'm it, and if I'm
I think that's true. And I think that's in my book. I have a chapter about building a support network. And even though you feel like you're alone, there are other resources available. There are other programs. You should never be the sole caregiver, because like you said, if the ship goes down, you're the captain, and you go down with it. So you want to identify, maybe if you don't have family, you have a neighbor that'd be willing to come by and help, or someone in your church, whatever. But finding local resources is hugely important. It's key. It's really key, because there's not a worse feeling when you're a caregiver and you're taken down, and then it becomes so overwhelming and so frustrating and so scary for the person too that's being taken care of.
right, right. I mean, I was talking to one of my friend's moms, and her mom's sole caretaker over her dad, and she's like, I just had the flu for 2 days, and I was up enough to go put his shoes on and right back to bed. And she was like, it freaked me out because I mean, again, I guess same thing as what you're saying before. Make sure these things are in place before crisis mode is happening, because
Well, and especially too, again, in the time of COVID, we've taken our
Mhm.
health for granted for so long, and now
Right.
unexpected things can happen. So it's super important to have a backup plan and have a respite plan in place, more than ever now, I think.
Could you walk us through why and what stimulate, like, when was it placed on your heart to get these books out? And then with the caregiving book, if you can kind of name off some of the chapters and what people can expect when they get that book.
Um, I'll tell you where it became in my heart. Having a hospital experience, you'll appreciate this. I was walking down my unit one day, and there was family members of a patient. They were outside his room and they were sobbing. And I looked in the room, and all that was happening was they were just taking a routine EKG. And I said to the family, "Why are you so upset?" And the resident who was doing the test didn't take the 2 minutes it would have taken to tell them what the test was and why they were doing it. They thought he was dying. They thought that machine meant he was going to be dead.
Oh my
And I
goodness.
just sat there, and I thought, if someone would have taken 1 minute, none of this anxiety, none of this pain, none of this fear would have been there. And that's what sort of took me on my trail to advocacy. And also when I went experienced infertility as well, I found, and back then it was 23 years ago, 24 years ago, so people weren't talking about it much. And so it was really something that I felt was an important thing to bring out in the open and talk about. And it was really incredible to me. I wrote my book, and I got a letter from an email from someone in Sri Lanka. And she told me she got my book and she wept, but they were tears of joy, because she had all these feelings and emotions about her infertility that she couldn't talk to anybody about. And she thought there was something wrong with her. And finding that it was normal and that it happened to other people brought her so much joy. So I've had all these messages and interactions in my life that really made a difference. In terms of my book, what I do is the first half of the book is my dad's story from the time he's a little boy. He's 6, and it takes us all the way through his life to the moment when I say goodbye to him and he dies. And one of the incredible things about writing my book was I didn't realize at the time till I wrote it, but he was such a model of caregiving, and I didn't even realize it. We always had family members and people in our home, and I just took it for granted. But my folks were taking care of relatives and people. There was never a time we didn't have someone who wasn't in my immediate family living with us. And my dad, in the first chapter, my dad talks about taking care of his brothers at a very young age. And so there was this modeling going on all through my life. And what I do is I do talk about building a support network. I talk about finding assisted living, figuring out what level of care you need. I talk about what questions to ask. Um, my father was uh, living in our family home, and all of a sudden he decided to sell it, and he didn't tell me. So I talk about how to decide when someone's ready to move on and what the next step is. I have a chapter about legal. I have a chapter about caregiving conversation. I have a chapter about planning a funeral and what
Mm.
goes into that, because it's so hard, and thinking about saying goodbye to somebody, and what happens after you say that goodbye when you've been a caregiver and that's your identity for so long. So I touch on all these issues as I go through his life, and I talk about my mom and taking care of my mom too, and because there are universal issues, as you well know, that happen for all of us. And I'm a great believer in words empowering people. And if you give them the
Mhm.
right words, and you, like the example of Sri Lanka, it's so helpful to know you're not alone. And I think my book really speaks to people in that way. I just use my dad's life as sort of a barometer, so people can see, and they can take a lot from what they're going through, talking about when we hear him talking about it too. And I love that his voice is there too, because for me that means he'll always live on. He
Right.
talks. He was a member of the Greatest Generation. He was in World War II, so he talks about those experiences too. And I think that's really important for people to,
Absolutely.
yeah. Those voices are dying out every day. There aren't many of them left, and so I love that his voice will always live on.
I agree. That's amazing. Are you also working right now? Are you still in, did I miss this? Are you still in a hospital situation at the
I'm
moment
not.
or
No,
just
I'm not.
writing and
I'm writing. I do. This is good for your listeners to know. Monday through Friday, and I'll give you at the end my Twitter page and my Facebook page, but I post articles Monday through Friday about caregiving, about aging, about all these things. Some of them I've written, and some of them other people have written, but I really think it's important to have that ongoing wealth of information available as your situation changes. So I keep doing that, and I also am doing articles for a website called
say,
choosingtherapy.com, and those articles are a lot about these kinds of issues, and people may find them very helpful. There's a lot of resources and information in them too.
do you have any online membership or community like that you facilitate any type
I
of group?
Informally, like I'm teaching a class in November to social workers for CEUs talking about caregiving, and I do podcasts like this, and I do interviews, and sometimes I contribute to articles, and sometimes I do radio. Um, so nothing every week or every month. It just sort of changes. But my website has a lot of information about podcasts and articles and magazine pieces, and there's a lot of information there for people around caregiving.
That is wonderful. I can just see all these people wanting you in their living room, sitting across from them, holding their hands and telling them it's going to be okay.
Well, they could do that visually watching your podcast. It'll be like I'm
Yeah,
there with them.
exactly. Just turn it back on. Oh, what am I not asking that I should be asking?
Oh, that's a great question. Maybe it's about some good resources for people to use.
Perfect. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. I would say this: the Family Caregiver Alliance is a great place to go and online. And that's the other thing I do want to mention. Uh, Websites and chat rooms online are so wonderful. They're like lifeboats for caregivers, because sometimes they can't get out. But
Mhm.
24/7, you can go online, and there are people you can talk to, professionals and peers. And I think that's hugely important for people. So I would really encourage you to think about that. Your local area and aging office. Also, there's a place called A Place for Mom. If people are looking to get help with housing or the next step for loved ones, it's free. And and they have an online site. Someone will call you back and they will help you find a place. And there's no cost to you at all. It's a wonderful, Joan London does the commercials on TV about A Place for Mom. It's a wonderful program. Also, the National Alliance for Caregiving is a wonderful, beautiful place to go. All kinds of resources, chat rooms there, support counseling, everything. So those are some of the, I'd say, the best resources available.
Thank you. That's a huge help. I just feel like for somebody to be able to go into the show notes and just start clicking and know that something's out there and that next resource will take them to their next one is so hopeful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. Just wrapping up, is there any last minute, put your arms around our listeners, anything that you would want to tell them?
I would tell them that caregiving is can be a challenging time, but it can also be a beautiful, wonderful time. I will always cherish my time with my dad, taking care of him, and I would say taking care of yourself. Remember that that is equally important, and don't be afraid to ask for help, and don't be afraid to include yourself in your caregiver plan.
That's awesome. Perfect. Thank you so much. You are wonderful.
Oh, thank you, Lindsay. So great to talk to you.
You too.